Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for being here this morning. It's a pleasure to be with you and be talking about this exciting process. For those of you I haven't had a chance yet to meet, I'm Jeremy Helms, and I serve as the director of our Office for Divine Worship and Sacraments in the Center for Pastoral Vitality. But in addition to that work, I have graduate study in the area of organizational leadership and change processes. And so it's my task to be the change leader, at least advocate for this change process as we go forward. You know, one of the reasons that change processes fail is not that there's not a goal, not that there's not an end in mind. We often think about beginning with the end in mind. So whether that's groupings of parishes or one pastor, one parish, or whatever the end looks like. But it's not enough to simply know what the end is. You have to also understand the process that you're going to take to get there. So it's really important for those of us who are tasked with leading in the change process to understand where we are and where we're going and where we've been. And so that's a really important thing for those of us in the Center for Pastoral Vitality. It's also going to be important for you because you play a leadership role within the Archdiocese to always be cognizant of where in the change process we find ourselves. We've chosen to map the Beacons of Light change process onto a model developed by Dr. John Kotter. Dr. Kotter is a professor at Harvard Business School, and in 1995, he wrote a book called Leading Change. And it soon became the gold standard for change processes used by thousands of organizations around the world. We might be tempted to think, oh, this is just something that applies to businesses or corporations or Fortune 500 companies. The reality is this process for change can be used by anybody. It's simply a matter of applying it and figuring out how it fits in your model. This model is, it's built as a cyclical model. So I want you to immediately begin thinking about it as a cyclical process, not something that's linear. We simply accomplish step one and move to step two, etc. And I'm going to walk us through these steps because it's really important, I think, for us to be continually reminding everyone where we are in the process. You know, it gets really easy to get immersed in doing the different stages of things or working on this or that little sub-initiative. And we often forget to kind of zoom out to that 30,000 foot level and figure out where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So I really encourage you in your roles within the Pastoral Center to always have this in mind. We'll be providing these slides as well as an article written by Dr. Kotter that explains this model a little more fully to you in the coming days as part of the follow-up from this meeting. So let's take a look at Dr. Kotter's 8 steps. The first step in this process is to really create a sense of urgency. We have to make sure that people understand the urgency behind this process. As Mike just alluded to, I think the average pew person, for lack of a better word, really doesn't understand the urgency behind this. As Mike said, whenever this parish schedule said there was going to be Mass, the lights are on and Mass happens. The parish office is open when it's supposed to be open. The electrical bill is paid in the parish center. Things that need to happen, happen because of the heroic efforts, I think, quite frankly, of our pastors and other parish leaders to make sure that everything always happens. So I think we're a little bit behind the curve in a general sense of urgency about this initiative. In our 4 convocations with the priests, in our meeting last week or 2 weeks ago with parish staffers, almost 200 parish staffers came together to kind of hear about this a little bit. We've been starting to really plant the seeds among the leaders in the Archdiocese. It's going to be critical for us to continue to establish that urgency among the faithful themselves. We're already talking, and Lisa and Michael talk about this before the end of our meeting today, about how we'll begin to spread the word to folks that are part of our parishes about this and create that urgency. The second step then, once you have a sense of urgency among the folks, is to form a guiding coalition. And you can see right here the general shape of the leadership structure for the Beacons of Light process. Number of different groups that are going to be working on different aspects here are being formed. The deans have been asked to take on new and different leadership roles. There'll be additional guiding groups formed of priests, lay staffers, other parish leaders, experts. And this will continue to unfold and develop as we go forward. But we have to have that guiding coalition. And I think you should see yourselves as members of the Pastoral Center staff as part of this larger guiding coalition. Because as Archbishop said, this is the top priority for the Pastoral Center in the coming years. And so every office is going to need to play a part in figuring out how to actually execute this Beacons of Light process. The third step in this process really then is to create this vision And so now that we've got a sense of urgency, we've got a guiding coalition. What's the vision for this look like? The kinds of things that are already happening. Again, we have the Archbishop's pastoral letter, Radiate Christ, where he draws a kind of a broad framework for thinking about the future of our archdiocese. As Rob mentioned, we're in the midst of collecting data from parishes, which will help us understand what the vision for these parish groupings will look like. We recently held these presbyteral convocations with all the priests to bring them up to speed and get their input. And right now we're in the midst of figuring out what are the priorities and parameters for the pastoral planning process. And these will be developed to guide the work that will happen on the ground in our deaneries and in our parish groupings, so that they can develop a vision for their own parish grouping, as well as we're developing a vision writ large for the archdiocese. Once we have that vision, Cotter's fourth step is about communicating that vision, getting folks organized to do the work of this process. As I mentioned, the deans are taking on new leadership responsibilities that they've never taken on before. Pastors are being equipped to lead these planning efforts. As you see, the third step, you're in the first part of that third step today, where we're trying to get you equipped and informed so that you can support this process as we go forward. One particular thing we'll be doing is training facilitators and equipping them to lead the efforts in our deanery and in our parishes. I think it's really important that we at an archdiocesan leadership level are supporting our parishes and schools as they go through this process. I think anyone who's lived through our previous planning processes that Father Jan spoke of earlier this morning realizes that one of the ways we failed in the past was not providing enough support to our parishes and schools as they went through these processes. And so we're deeply committed at this moment to making sure that happens. And you should see yourself as a huge part of that support team going forward. So having created a sense of urgency, having kind of formed your guiding coalition, created a vision, and starting to communicate that vision, it's now important to empower others to take on this work and to enable action. You know, several pastors have asked, well, what do we do in the short run? What do we do while we're waiting, right? Their short-term planning needs to continue, right? Parish life goes on, even in the midst of the pandemic. Pastors, school leaders are thinking about, okay, what does this look like in the next year or two? At the same time, our deaneries are starting to do strategic planning, and that'll lead to these parish groupings. The planning process continues at the pastoral level as well, as we start to think about what are the parameters and priorities that lead us to this bright future for our parishes and schools. The Priestly Life Committee of the Presbyteral Council is starting to develop leadership training opportunities for our priests so that they're better equipped to lead in this change process. So I think that's really important. And we may be identifying other opportunities for us as staff of the Pastoral Center to also have training in this area of leadership. This is really going to be critical. Leadership it's just going to be critical. I don't know how else to say it any more clearly there. Once we've got folks somewhat on board and working together on this process, it's really important for us to generate and celebrate some short-term wins. It's really easy to make the perfect the enemy of the good and be so focused on a future that we don't even understand what's happening in front of us, right? The common expression is to miss the forest because we're too busy looking at trees. And I think one of the things that Dr. Cotter points out is key to any successful change process is finding out what are the wins, quote unquote, we can celebrate along the way. I think it'll be a win, quite frankly, when we get the parish groupings figured out and they understand who they're going to be partnering with, who they're going to be grouped with. That's a win, right? That's a huge win that will be supported by a massive data gathering effort and strategic planning process. That's a great win. Once we get a few pilots, parish groupings and deaneries to begin piloting this work and this new relationship, I think that's going to be a win we can celebrate. And all of this is well contexted by our celebration of the bicentennial. We'll be celebrating a lot about the life of our diocese. And so to have some of these short-term wins will be important. I think it's key for us to keep from this process being one that is negative, being one that is fundamentally framed as a challenge, to seeing it as an opportunity. The more we can celebrate the short-term wins that we can generate along the way, it will look more like, and in fact, it will be more hope-filled. It will be more optimistic. It will be more about mission and less about maintenance, to use the metaphor we've been using this morning. Once we've achieved those 6 steps, and again, these are cyclical, right? So we've done a little bit of forming a guiding coalition and we start to articulate the vision. Well, then we realize, wait, we need a few more folks in the guiding coalition. Oh, okay, let's go ahead and keep working on the vision. And now we can start to recruit others for the vision, but we need to add more to the vision, right? It's cyclical. It's not step 1's done, let's move along. So I think it's really important. Once we've accomplished those 6 steps, the 7th step here is about sustaining acceleration. This is a process that's going to unfold over 3 to 5 years, right? And really, as you think about parish groupings and the way they continue to exist, it's going to be even longer than that. There's going to be a long, long range process involved here. And it's going to be important for us to keep that momentum going. So even though we have these final configurations of parishes and groups, and that's going to happen in phases and waves, the pastoral planning is going to be focused on, okay, what does it look like for us to continue figuring out how these groupings live together, how they can now function in a new and different way to truly be communities that are beacons of light, that are forming missionary disciples. We're going to get really tempted in 2022 to call it, right? We're going to say, hey, look, we did it. We got all our parish groupings, right? We're good to go. And I think it's going to be really key for us to sustain that acceleration, because if we were to simply do the strategic planning, in other words, get the parish groupings, without also doing the pastoral planning, the metaphor I like to think about is, or the analogy would be, that we bought somebody a car, but we never taught them how to drive it. So not only do we have to get the car, build these strategic planning, pastoral groupings and the models, we have to actually help people understand how to use it, how to drive that car. And so we have to make sure we sustain that acceleration and keep things moving forward. The final step in this model, the 8th step in this model here, is about instituting the change. Dr. Cotter is very keen to point out this is often where change processes fail. You get through steps 7 of 8 and you think, okay, well, we're done. We've managed to tick all the things off our list. But what we haven't been able to do is really make it a change in our culture, really make it shape how we actually do things on a daily basis. You know, we've heard a lot in this pandemic about the quote, new normal. I think it's important for us to think about this as we create new models for parish life and archdiocesan life. What is the new normal? And that's going to be part of instituting the change. And so that's going to be a critical step for us, certainly by the summer of 2022 and beyond. And I would encourage you in your roles as members of the Pastoral Center staff to be thinking about what needs to change about how you and your office support parishes and schools. What is the new normal for your support of parishes and schools that's a result of this Beacons of Light process? Again, this is a very quick overview of this process. It'll be our task in the Center of Pastoral Vitality to keep you all attuned to where we've been, where we are, and where we're going with this process, so that you have a sense of where we are, not only within the Cotter model, but also generally, what are the steps we need to be taking to keep the change process moving forward. Again, we'll be sharing these slides and an article that'll flesh this model a little more for you so you understand with a little more depth. And don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Lisa or to Rob with any questions or thoughts you have about how this Cotter model could actually be used in a particular aspect of your work in your office or your department.